I welcome all MoonShine fans to the MoonShine Video Guides channel. It's been a while since I've said this phrase, but I must admit, making videos about MoonShine is a real pleasure for me. Today we'll talk about related fields. We'll look at an example where a user can select a country, city, and district. And I'm actually touching on this topic for a reason, as it's the most common question in the chat. Despite being well covered in the documentation, this question is still top in popularity. And today we'll look at it together. We'll also look at another very interesting topic. It might seem difficult for beginners, which is why we'll be looking at it as well. It's MoonShine's reactivity. Okay, friends, let's start with related fields in order. Let's go. At the start, we have three belongs to fields: country, city, and district. What's the initial problem? Let's go back to the browser. We have a choice of country, a huge number. Let's say we choose a specific country, and we'd like to see the cities that belong to this country. But by default, we'll see the entire set of cities from the database. The same goes for districts. In fact, it's a basic task, and it's solved just as simply in MoonShine. If we go back to the code, all we need to do is the following. For the second field, city, specify the associated with method, which field it's associated with, and in the parameter, specify the field name. Our belongs to takes relationships as a second parameter, and the column is built based on the relationship. My foreign key is all default. According to naming conventions, it will be country ID for us. If you don't follow the convention, then accordingly the second parameter from the relationship, or if you change the column in the field, then you take it from here. If you have nested fields, you can also build through a dot. So it's all simple here. And let's immediately make a related field over district, only it's accordingly related to city. City ID. Okay, we go back, refresh and see that by default, when we select a city, it's no longer all values, but only those that belong to the selected country. Let's change the country. We'll see a new set of cities. Let's select a city, and we'll have a certain list of districts. If we now select, then reset again, say to another country, then our previous values will be reset, and we'll select them again with you. And the same in reverse order. We change the city, our cities are reloaded again. Nothing complicated, in one method, and we get related fields. Since we have educational content, so that you understand MoonShine as deeply as possible, I'll also tell you what's under the hood of this method, what it's built on. Let's go. For this, let's dive inside the method and see that it's based on async search. Those who are familiar with this method, I think, immediately understood what I'm talking about. We could have done the same based on this method, it's just convenient sugar for us. We also see that the search query parameter is passed, and in addition to just making a connection with the parent field, we can also pass a second parameter through a function. Here we'll have a builder, and we'll be able to additionally modify it. Let's say we're not just going to work based on the parent field. That is, under the hood, it will look like this for us. Country ID and ID from the request. We'll be able to additionally do, let's say, active true, or something like that. Make an additional sorting. Anything. That is, we also have access to the builder, and for more complex moments, we won't have to use the async search method that's under the hood. But if you want to achieve even more customization, then you can use not associated with, but the original async search. Which field will search by here? How many results we'll have? And then we have access to callbacks with builder, async search query, what we saw with you, where we can modify the builder and also filter values based on the request. For clarity, it looks like this. Let's do it to show all the parameters that are available to us. The first one will be our builder. The second will be our request. You can just request, you can MoonShine request, whichever you prefer. If you need methods for getting a resource and so on, then MoonShine request. And then based on the builder, you build return query, where here. That's where the new PHP storm with artificial intelligence support even suggests. We specify that our country ID will be based on country ID from the request, and for each search, the request of the entire form will fall into the callback here. But friends, this is just out of curiosity. in most cases you'll need just this method. And if you need to adjust the query a little more, then through the second parameter with Query Builder you can do it. Let's move on to the next topic, reactivity. It's very interesting. We're going to come up with something right here in the form now, but before we start, let me tell you a brief backstory. In general, what does it represent? When we enter something into certain fields that we specify as reactive, let's say name or email. In state, we'll immediately send to the backend, process, and based on it return already changed fields, all those fields that will mark as reactive. If you've used the same Livewire, then in principle such logic is by default on all fields. And actually, when I started implementing this idea, the main thing was to make not all fields reactive, but only those that will mark. Because if you've used Livewire more deeply, as I have, and why I abandoned it, when there are many fields, the same admin panel filament, when there are 10 or 20 fields, everything is okay. But when we have a huge resource, every sneeze sends a request, all this is processed, everything glitches and it's impossible to work with. In general, the same would be true with MoonShine if all fields were reactive by default. As soon as we had a huge resource, utter darkness would occur. Therefore, where reactivity is required, we turn it on. Okay, let's see how it works. Let's say we specify that we'll have a name field, reactive, just reactive, it's in the list of all reactive fields. And we specify that we also have a reactive email. But, in order for us to modify one of the fields, we need to specify a function that takes all reactive fields as the first parameter. Fields. That is, we'll have both name and email here. And everything that we mark as reactive. Let's say ID, or something else. The function itself should return these fields back. This is the main feature, that each field can now modify them in its own way. That is, email can modify name can modify email, or something else, or all at once. We have access to all reactive fields that we can change not just its value, but the wrapper, hang classes on top, completely remove it from the DOM, replace the label. In general, a huge number of possibilities. Let's play here to see how it works. Okay, we have email reactive, name reactive, and we want to do the following here. When our states have changed, we'll form an email immediately based on the name, make it disabled, change the background of both the email field and the name field. Let's, I don't know, maybe change the label too. In general, all sorts of things. Okay, the first parameter for us is fields, the second parameter for us is the value of the current field. In this case, we have email, so our field will be of string type. Okay, but it might not be there by default when we change the name with you. Email has no value, so it will be null for us. We don't forget this moment. Next, friends, the next parameter is the current field. To quickly have access to this email field, and not search for it in the general list of reactive ones, we also get it here in the function. Let's make email field. And if needed, we also have access to all states, to all values of reactive fields. The last parameter, let it be like this array, values. Okay. Next, friends, we follow the task we've invented. Okay, the current field, email, set value. What will we specify here? Let's do it through stringable. Take from the value's name, yes, if we have it. Only let it be not null, but an empty string, turn it into a slug and add. Let it be at cut code dev. I'm just fantasizing to see how it works. Okay, friends, let's go back, refresh, let's try to write something in name. As you can see, our email immediately changes reactively based on the logic we implemented, that is, the value is transferred here, let's write in Russian. And then concatenation at cutcode.dev. Let's do something else. Let's say, change the label. And let it also be, as we said earlier, custom attributes. And add style, background, blue. Okay, let's go back, refresh, although in general it's not necessary to refresh, write something, and we see that now the label has changed immediately, to new label was email, background was set, well, and the value continues to change. And now the most interesting thing, as I told you earlier, we have fields with all reactive fields, and we can do the following right here from email, let's say, fields, find by column, specify email. And let's do the same custom attributes. We can check for null, but in general we are sure that we have, or rather name, it is present in the form. Next, we can also change the label. Let's do it. Here's such beauty, such fantasy we have today. Let's go back and try to write something. As we can see, now name changes, and label, and blue. That is, we have access not just to values, but to the full entity of the field, to its wrapper, to its label. Right inside Reactivity, you continue to work with it the same way you worked in the resource. And this is very cool. Reactivity solves a lot of tasks. The same nested fields as we did with you. Imagine selects, your data is not stored in the database, and based on Reactivity you rebuild options depending on any fields on the page. All this works quickly, even considering that we have Debugbar enabled and there's no default optimization, but the mechanism is very cool. I recommend you to get familiar with it. And based on this example, you can start building something. By default, fields where Reactivity is enabled are already present in the box. This is the slug field. We can play around, though the user doesn't have such a field, and sugar is immediately available to us. Slug by default depends on a certain field, based on which it builds the slug. Let's do this moment. Like this. Let's go back, refresh, and when entering in the name field, the slug will also be formed. By the way, friends, taking this opportunity, since I started telling you about Debugbar, that regardless of whether it's enabled, everything works quickly. I just turned off the debug view mode and let me tell you about this again. Just the other day I read an article on Habra about filament. As I told you earlier, I don't use filament myself and won't use it, because there's Livewire and with large resources it will be painful. But here I'll tell you a bit in favor of Livewire, as in the comments on Habra they wrote that Debugbar is enabled and filament goes crazy. Performance-wise, everything starts to glitch. In fact, it's not about filament. The same story will likely be in MoonShine. Maybe it won't be so strong to turn on, but still. The point is that Debugbar also collects information on all connected views. And we're dealing with admin panels. Filament, MoonShine, there are a huge number of different views. Each component, if we look, here the logo is views, here are views, the menu is from a bunch of views, each field is views. There are a huge number of views and accordingly it glitches. If you use Debugbar during development along with Filament, MoonShine and similar admin panels, be sure to publish the config and turn off debug view. And that's all, friends, I hope it was useful to you. I showed a super popular question about nested fields. Also a cool feature that personally makes me happy, it's Reactivity. I hope you liked it, I upgraded your knowledge. I'm glad that those who use MoonShine are becoming more and more. This motivates us as developers to add new features. I'll also say that MoonShine 3 is not far off. It will be even cooler than the second version. I guarantee you that. And that's all. I shake your hand. I say thank you for watching, for the like you just put, for the comments you wrote. Also be sure to write about what other topic to make a lesson on MoonShine. I say goodbye to you and we'll see you in the next video on the MoonShine Video Guides channel.